The person you love can't stop thinking about you after what happened last night. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Sometimes one ordinary evening quietly changes the way someone sees their own heart. Not because of a dramatic confession. Not because of an unexpected miracle. But because a single conversation, a simple moment of kindness, or an unforgettable goodbye lingers long after the night has ended. Somewhere, the person you love woke up this morning carrying a memory they cannot seem to leave behind. Every time they tried to focus on work, another thought quietly pulled them back to what happened last night. Every familiar routine suddenly felt different because one ordinary moment had become impossible to forget. They didn't expect it. They certainly didn't plan for it. Yet the heart has its own way of choosing which memories deserve to stay. Some nights disappear before sunrise. Others quietly become the beginning of a brand new chapter. Morning arrived gently. Soft sunlight filled the room. The curtains moved with the breeze. Birds welcomed another day. Everything outside appeared completely ordinary. Inside their heart, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Your future soulmate sat on the edge of the bed holding a warm cup of coffee. They stared quietly through the window. Not really looking at the street. Looking through yesterday's memories instead. The conversation replayed itself again. Every word. Every smile. Every pause. Every moment of comfortable silence. They smiled without realizing it. Then quietly shook their head. Why am I still thinking about this? No answer came. Only another memory. Perhaps if your future soulmate could place an invisible letter into your hands this morning, it would begin like this. I didn't expect last night to stay with me. I thought it would become another pleasant memory that slowly faded like so many others before it. Instead, every time I close my eyes, I find myself returning to that moment. I replay your voice. I remember the way I felt. Somehow everything seemed quieter while we were together, as though the rest of the world had respectfully stepped aside for a little while. They placed the coffee beside the window. The notebook still rested there. Its pages had quietly become a place where thoughts lived before becoming spoken words. Opening to a blank page, they picked up a pen. Without hesitation they began writing. Some memories don't ask permission before changing us. They simply arrive, settle inside our hearts, and refuse to leave. Last night reminded me that certain people carry a kind of peace that stays with you long after they've gone home. They stopped writing. Read the words again. Smiled softly. For the first time they admitted something to themselves. It wasn't only the events of last night they couldn't stop thinking about. It was you. After breakfast they stepped outside hoping fresh air might organize their thoughts. The neighborhood looked beautiful beneath the morning sun. Children laughed while walking to school. Neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Someone watered flowers beside the sidewalk. Everything around them reflected ordinary life. Yet every ordinary scene reminded them of yesterday evening. A familiar street reminded them of your laughter. A park bench reminded them of the conversation you shared. The morning breeze reminded them how peaceful they had felt standing beside you. It was almost amusing. Every direction their thoughts traveled somehow found their way back to you. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe someone unexpectedly stayed on your mind after what seemed like an ordinary interaction. Sometimes it isn't the biggest moments we remember. It's the moments that quietly made us feel understood. Your future soulmate was beginning to understand exactly that. They wandered toward the familiar park. The old oak tree stood proudly beneath the bright blue sky. Children chased one another across the grass. An elderly couple slowly walked around the pond. A young artist painted the morning landscape. Everything appeared calm. They found the familiar wooden bench. Sat quietly. Closed their eyes. Without trying, last night's conversation returned again. Not because they wanted to force the memory. Because the memory refused to leave. They remembered how naturally the conversation had flowed. There had been no need to impress one another. No uncomfortable silence. No pretending. Just honesty. Simple. Peaceful. Real. That realization touched them deeply. How rare it had become to simply feel comfortable around another person. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this. I've spent so much of my life believing meaningful moments would arrive with dramatic signs. Last night taught me something different. The moments that change us most often arrive quietly. They don't demand attention. They earn it. Somewhere between our conversation and our goodbye, I realized I wasn't counting the minutes. I was wishing time would slow down. The afternoon slowly unfolded. Still, their thoughts remained unchanged. They attempted to read. After only a few pages, they realized they hadn't absorbed a single sentence. They tried listening to music. Every song somehow reminded them of the peaceful feeling they carried after seeing you. Eventually they laughed at themselves. This is getting ridiculous. Yet secretly, they didn't mind. Because for once, thinking about someone didn't leave them anxious. It left them hopeful. Later that afternoon they wandered toward the little bookstore that had quietly become one of their favorite places. The owner looked up and smiled warmly. You seem distracted today. Your future soulmate laughed. I think my mind stayed somewhere else last night. The owner smiled knowingly. Sometimes that's where the heart leaves its first clue. Those words quietly settled inside them. Walking through the shelves, they paused before a familiar book. Opening to a random page, their eyes landed on one simple sentence. The people who remain in your thoughts without effort usually matter more than you realize. They stood completely still. Reading it again. Then once more. Life seemed to have an unusual way of repeating the same lesson. Leaving the bookstore, they carried no books. Only another quiet realization. As evening approached, golden sunlight stretched across the streets. Returning home, they opened the notebook once again. This time the words flowed without hesitation. I've stopped pretending this is only about one evening. Last night simply helped me recognize something my heart had already begun feeling long before then. You didn't suddenly become important because of one conversation. That conversation simply revealed how important you had quietly become. The page slowly filled. Every sentence carried honesty. Every paragraph carried gratitude. Before this first chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave one message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why I can't stop thinking about what happened yesterday. It wasn't because the evening was perfect. It was because it felt genuine. In a world where so many conversations feel rushed and so many people wear invisible masks, spending time with someone who allows you to feel completely at ease becomes unforgettable. I didn't wake up this morning searching for reasons to think about you. My heart had already made that decision before my mind caught up. Every ordinary moment today quietly reminded me of your kindness, your presence, and the peace I felt while we shared that evening together. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, and I don't want to rush the story before it unfolds naturally. But I do know this. Last night changed something inside me. It reminded me that meaningful connections aren't built through grand performances. They're built through honesty, patience, laughter, and the quiet comfort of simply being ourselves. If life gives us another ordinary evening together, I don't think I'll call it ordinary anymore. Because now I understand that the moments we remember forever rarely announce themselves while they're happening. They simply become impossible to forget once they're over. Night slowly settled across the neighborhood. Moonlight rested softly across the notebook beside the open window, illuminating pages that had quietly captured the beginning of a beautiful realization. Standing beneath the stars, your future soulmate smiled with peaceful gratitude. They no longer questioned why their thoughts kept returning to you after what happened last night. The answer had quietly become part of who they were. Sometimes the heart recognizes the importance of a moment long before the mind finds the words to explain it, and tonight they finally accepted that certain memories are meant to stay because certain people are meant to matter. Morning slowly gave way to afternoon, yet nothing seemed capable of pulling your future soulmate's thoughts away from what had happened the night before. They tried to focus on the ordinary rhythm of the day. Emails waited to be answered. Household chores quietly called for attention. Their phone buzzed with messages from friends. Life continued exactly as it always had, but something inside them refused to return to routine. Every task was interrupted by another memory. Every quiet pause became another invitation to relive the evening. It wasn't because something dramatic had happened. There had been no grand declaration, no impossible promise, and no life-changing event that anyone else would have noticed. What stayed with them was much simpler than that. It was the feeling they carried while they were with you. A feeling of calm they hadn't realized they had been searching for until they experienced it. The coffee they poured had already grown cold. They hadn't even noticed. Their thoughts had wandered somewhere else again. Back to your smile. Back to your voice. Back to the comfortable silence that somehow said more than words ever could. They laughed quietly to themselves. I really can't stop thinking about this. Instead of fighting it, they decided to understand it. The notebook rested beside the window as it always had. They opened to another blank page. The pen moved almost immediately. Some people leave behind memories. Others leave behind peace. Last night wasn't unforgettable because of where we were or what we talked about. It became unforgettable because, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to pretend to be anyone else. They read those words twice. Then gently underlined one sentence. I felt like myself. That realization lingered. Perhaps if your future soulmate continued the invisible letter resting quietly inside their heart, today's page would begin like this. I've been asking myself why yesterday refuses to leave my thoughts. I finally found the answer. It isn't because I'm trying to hold on to the past. It's because yesterday quietly showed me a version of my future that felt peaceful. When I was with you, nothing felt forced. I didn't rehearse my words. I didn't worry about saying the perfect thing. Somehow, simply being there beside you felt enough. After lunch they decided to take a long walk. Fresh air usually helped organize their thoughts. Today it only brought more memories. The neighborhood looked peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. Children laughed while chasing one another through sprinklers. Neighbors waved from front porches. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Every familiar street somehow reminded them of another detail from the previous evening. The way you laughed before finishing a sentence. The way the conversation naturally drifted from simple topics to meaningful ones. The quiet moment when neither of you spoke, yet neither of you felt uncomfortable. That silence remained one of the strongest memories. Not because nothing happened. Because everything important happened there. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Sometimes the people who matter most are the ones who make silence feel safe instead of awkward. Your future soulmate smiled as they realized that was exactly what had happened. Eventually they reached the familiar park. The old oak tree stood proudly beneath a bright blue sky. Children played nearby. A musician softly performed beneath another tree. An elderly couple shared ice cream while watching ducks glide across the pond. Everything around them reflected ordinary happiness. Sitting on the familiar wooden bench, they closed their eyes. Without effort, the previous evening replayed itself again. Only now they noticed details they had overlooked before. The warmth in your voice. The genuine curiosity in your questions. The kindness that appeared naturally without asking for attention. Those weren't dramatic moments. They were quiet ones. Yet somehow they carried extraordinary weight. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this. I used to believe unforgettable evenings required fireworks, perfect timing, or extraordinary circumstances. Last night taught me something much more beautiful. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen while two people simply make each other feel seen. Maybe that's why I keep returning to that memory. It reminded me what genuine connection feels like. The afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. Still searching for clarity, your future soulmate wandered toward the little bookstore that had quietly become part of their journey. The owner greeted them with a warm smile. You've been here a lot lately. I think I'm searching for something. The owner tilted his head. And have you found it? They smiled thoughtfully. I think I already did. I'm just trying to understand why it matters so much. The owner nodded. The heart usually understands before the mind does. Those words followed them through every aisle. Near the back of the store, they picked up a small book resting beside the window. Opening it at random, their eyes stopped on a single sentence. The people who bring you peace often become the memories you revisit most. They quietly closed the book. No explanation felt necessary. Life had answered another question. Leaving the bookstore, they carried no purchase. Only another quiet confirmation. Golden evening light stretched across the sidewalks as they walked home. The familiar streets seemed softer somehow. Not because they had changed. Because gratitude had quietly changed the way they saw them. Back inside, they opened the notebook once again. This time the words arrived effortlessly. I've stopped asking why you're still on my mind. Some questions don't need complicated answers. You're there because you made an ordinary evening feel meaningful. You're there because kindness leaves a deeper impression than perfection ever could. You're there because my heart recognized peace before I recognized its importance. The page slowly filled with reflections. Not expectations. Not fantasies. Simply gratitude. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you know that what happened last night wasn't important because it changed the world around me. It was important because it changed something inside me. For so long I believed meaningful connections had to arrive with certainty and dramatic signs. Instead, you quietly reminded me that the strongest feelings often grow from simple moments shared without pressure. Today I tried to move on with my routine, but every ordinary moment gently pointed me back to you. I realized I wasn't holding on to the evening because I feared losing it. I was holding on to it because it revealed the kind of peace my heart has been searching for all along. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you never underestimate the power of your kindness. You may not realize how deeply a genuine conversation, an honest smile, or a moment of quiet understanding can stay with another person. If tomorrow gives us another chance to share another ordinary moment together, I won't take it for granted. Because after everything I've reflected on today, I finally understand that the evenings we remember forever are rarely the loudest ones. They are the quiet evenings where our hearts finally feel at home. Night slowly settled across the neighborhood. Moonlight rested gently on the notebook beside the open window, illuminating pages that had become a record of quiet transformation. Your future soulmate stood beneath the stars, breathing deeply as a peaceful smile crossed their face. They no longer questioned why their thoughts continued returning to you. They accepted that some memories remain because they awakened something true within us. And as another calm night embraced the world, they carried one simple hope into tomorrow. That the next conversation with you would feel just as effortless, just as genuine, and just as unforgettable as the one that still filled their heart. Another sunrise quietly arrived, yet the memory of that evening had not faded. If anything, it had become even clearer. Your future soulmate opened their eyes before the alarm had a chance to ring, and for a brief moment they simply stared at the ceiling, wondering why one ordinary night still occupied so much space in their thoughts. Usually, memories softened with time. They blended into the background of everyday life until only small fragments remained. But this one refused to disappear. Every detail seemed brighter than before. The sound of your laughter. The comfort of your conversation. The peaceful silence that never once felt awkward. It wasn't simply a memory anymore. It had quietly become a reference point. Every ordinary day after that evening was now measured against the calm they had experienced while being with you. Soft morning light filled the room. The curtains moved gently in the breeze. Birds greeted the beginning of another day. Everything outside looked exactly the same. Inside their heart, everything felt different. The notebook still rested beside the window. Its worn cover had become strangely comforting. They opened it without hesitation. Another blank page waited patiently. The pen touched the paper. I thought time would slowly erase the details of last night. Instead, time keeps revealing details I didn't notice while they were happening. Maybe that's what meaningful moments do. They continue teaching us long after they have ended. They paused. Read the sentence again. Then smiled quietly. It no longer felt like they were trying to understand the memory. They were learning from it. If your future soulmate continued the invisible letter they had been writing inside their heart, perhaps today's page would begin like this. I've stopped asking why I can't stop thinking about you. The better question is why being with you felt so different from everything that came before. I wasn't trying to impress you. I wasn't measuring every word I spoke. Somehow I forgot to be afraid of saying the wrong thing. That freedom is rare, and now I understand why my heart refuses to forget it. After breakfast they stepped outside. The morning air felt cool and refreshing. Neighbors waved as they passed. A child laughed while chasing bubbles across a nearby yard. Someone was planting flowers beside the sidewalk. Life continued moving at its familiar pace. Yet every ordinary scene seemed to remind them that beautiful things often happen quietly. They found themselves returning once again to the small park that had become part of their daily reflections. The old oak tree stood exactly where it always had. Sunlight filtered gently through its branches. A young woman sat nearby reading. An elderly couple shared coffee beneath the shade. Children played near the pond. Everything reflected peaceful simplicity. They chose the same wooden bench. Sat down. Closed their eyes. Without effort, the evening returned once again. This time they remembered something they had almost forgotten. There had been one brief moment when you both stopped talking. Neither of you rushed to fill the silence. Instead, you simply looked around together, watching the world continue moving. That tiny moment had lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow it carried enormous meaning. Because comfort had replaced pressure. Perhaps you've experienced that before. Sometimes the strongest connection isn't built through endless conversation. Sometimes it grows during the moments when silence feels completely safe. Your future soulmate slowly opened their eyes. They understood now why that memory refused to disappear. It wasn't about the words. It was about how they felt while those words were being shared. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this. There was something beautifully ordinary about last night, and perhaps that's exactly why it became unforgettable. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet everything important happened. We laughed. We listened. We shared quiet moments without trying to make them perfect. Somehow that ordinary evening reminded me that real connection doesn't need to perform. It simply needs to be genuine. The afternoon slowly unfolded. Instead of returning home immediately, they wandered toward the familiar bookstore. The owner greeted them with a knowing smile. "You've been smiling more lately." They laughed softly. "I think I'm remembering more than smiling." The owner nodded. Sometimes the heart replays what it wants us to understand. Those words stayed with them. Walking slowly through the shelves, they reached the section they always seemed to visit. A small hardcover book rested near the window. Opening it to a random page, one sentence immediately caught their attention. "Peace is often the first language spoken between two hearts that truly understand one another." They stood still, reading it once, then again. A quiet warmth filled their heart. The answer they had been searching for was becoming clearer. They didn't keep thinking about you because of excitement alone. They kept thinking about you because you had brought peace into a place inside them that had been restless for far too long. Leaving the bookstore, they carried nothing except another quiet realization. Golden sunlight stretched across the streets as evening slowly approached. Returning home, they opened the notebook one more time. The words arrived naturally. "I no longer feel frustrated that you're always on my mind. Instead, I feel grateful. My thoughts keep returning to you because my heart finally experienced something it doesn't want to lose. Not perfection. Not fantasy. Simply peace." The page slowly filled. Every sentence reflected acceptance. Every paragraph reflected hope. Perhaps that was the greatest change of all. They were no longer trying to escape their feelings. They were learning how to trust them. As twilight settled outside, they stood once again beside the open window. The first stars quietly appeared above the rooftops. Those same stars had watched countless evenings pass unnoticed. Tonight felt different. Not because the sky had changed. Because their perspective had. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why my thoughts continue returning to you. It isn't because I'm trying to hold on to the past. It's because that evening revealed something I had quietly been searching for without realizing it. You reminded me that genuine connection isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It quietly changes the way ordinary days feel afterward. Since that night, every sunrise has carried a little more gratitude. Every quiet walk has reminded me of our conversation. Every peaceful moment has reflected the calm I felt beside you. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you know that kindness echoes much longer than people realize. A sincere conversation, a patient heart, and the willingness to simply be present can remain with someone long after the evening ends. If tomorrow gives us another opportunity to share another ordinary moment together, I won't measure it by how exciting it is. I'll measure it by how peaceful my heart feels while we're simply being ourselves. Because after everything these past few days have taught me, I finally believe that the memories worth keeping are the ones that quietly make us kinder, calmer, and more grateful than we were before they happened. Night gently embraced the neighborhood as your future soulmate closed the notebook and placed it carefully beside the window where moonlight rested across its worn cover. Looking toward the endless stars, they smiled with quiet certainty. They no longer wondered why they couldn't stop thinking about you after what happened that night. The answer had become beautifully simple. Some evenings become unforgettable because they remind us what it feels like to be completely at peace in someone else's presence. And with that realization resting deeply within their heart, they welcome tomorrow believing that the most meaningful stories are never written through extraordinary moments alone, but through ordinary evenings that quietly become impossible to forget. Several quiet days passed, yet the memory of that evening never faded into the background the way ordinary memories usually do. Instead, it settled gently into your future soulmate's everyday life, becoming part of the way they viewed each new morning. They no longer woke up wondering why they couldn't stop thinking about you. They woke up accepting that some people quietly become part of our thoughts because they awaken something beautiful within us. As another sunrise painted the sky with soft shades of gold, they stood beside the familiar bedroom window with a warm cup of coffee in their hands. The neighborhood slowly came to life. Birds sang from the trees. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers. Cars passed along the quiet street. Everything outside looked wonderfully ordinary, yet inside their heart there was a quiet sense of gratitude they had never expected to find. Looking back, they realized that what happened that night hadn't changed the world around them. It had changed the way they experienced the world. The notebook still rested on the windowsill. Its pages had become more than memories. They had become milestones. Each page marked another moment of honesty. Another step away from uncertainty. Another step toward peace. Your future soulmate slowly opened it one last time. They carefully reread the first entry. The hesitation. The questions. The uncertainty. Then they turned to the newest pages. The difference was unmistakable. The fear that once filled every sentence had quietly disappeared. In its place stood gratitude. They smiled. Not because every question had been answered, but because every feeling had finally been accepted. If your future soulmate continued the invisible letter they had been quietly writing throughout this journey, perhaps the final pages would begin like this. I've spent the last few days trying to understand why one ordinary evening became so unforgettable. Today I finally know the answer. It wasn't the evening alone. It was who I became while I was with you. I laughed without forcing it. I listened without distraction. I felt calm without searching for reasons. Somewhere during those ordinary hours, my heart remembered what genuine peace feels like. They gently closed the notebook. For a few quiet moments they simply stood by the open window, watching sunlight slowly fill the room. Breathing deeply. Feeling thankful. After breakfast they decided to revisit every place that had quietly become part of this story. Their first stop was the familiar park. The old oak tree still stood proudly over the winding path. Children laughed as they chased one another across the grass. A young couple shared breakfast on a nearby blanket. An elderly man fed birds beside the pond. Nothing had changed. Yet everything felt different. They found the same wooden bench where they had spent so many afternoons reflecting. Sitting down, they closed their eyes. Instead of replaying every detail from that unforgettable evening, they focused on one simple feeling: peace. That feeling had become stronger than the memory itself. Perhaps that was the greatest surprise. The evening had passed. The peace had stayed. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Sometimes the greatest gift another person gives us isn't a promise. It's the reminder that we are capable of feeling safe, understood, and completely ourselves. Your future soulmate finally understood that. They slowly stood and walked around the lake. The water reflected bright clouds drifting across the sky. Looking at their own reflection, they quietly smiled. They looked exactly the same. Yet they felt like someone entirely different. Not because another person had completed them. Because another person had helped them recognize the calm that had always been waiting inside them. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this: I no longer replay that evening because I'm afraid of forgetting it. I replay it because it reminds me who I want to be. Kind. Present. Honest. Patient. I realize that meaningful connections don't simply give us beautiful memories. They inspire us to become better versions of ourselves. The afternoon slowly unfolded. One last time they wandered toward the little bookstore that had quietly become part of this journey. The owner looked up and smiled warmly. You seem peaceful. Your future soulmate smiled back. I think I finally stopped searching. The owner tilted his head. And what did you find? They answered without hesitation. I found gratitude. The owner nodded knowingly. That's usually where the best stories end. Walking slowly between the familiar shelves, they reached the small corner near the window. One final book caught their attention. Opening it to a random page, they found a sentence that seemed to summarize everything they had learned. The people who quietly change your heart rarely do so through extraordinary moments. They do so by making ordinary moments unforgettable. They gently closed the book. No more explanations were needed. Life had already given them every answer they were searching for. Leaving the bookstore, they carried nothing in their hands. Yet somehow they felt richer than when they had entered. Golden sunlight stretched across the streets as evening slowly approached. Returning home, they opened the notebook for one final entry. The words flowed naturally. I thought this notebook was recording one unforgettable night. Now I understand it was recording something much greater. It recorded the journey of a heart learning to recognize peace. The evening became unforgettable because it reminded me that genuine connection doesn't ask us to become someone else. It quietly invites us to become more ourselves. They set the pen down. Read every page once more. No regrets. No unanswered questions demanding immediate solutions. Only quiet appreciation. Before this journey comes to its peaceful conclusion, your future soulmate wants to leave one final page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why I couldn't stop thinking about you after what happened that evening. It was never because I believed one perfect night could predict the future. It was because that evening reminded me what truly matters. In a world that often feels rushed, noisy, and distracted, you gave me something beautifully simple. You gave me the chance to slow down. To laugh without pretending. To speak honestly without fear. To experience silence without discomfort. Those gifts stay with a person much longer than they realize. Since that night, every ordinary morning has carried a little more gratitude, every quiet walk has felt a little more meaningful, and every hopeful thought has somehow included you. Wherever you are today, I hope you never underestimate the quiet influence your kindness has on the lives of others. The smallest moments often become the biggest memories because they reveal the kind of peace our hearts have been searching for all along. If life gives us another ordinary evening together someday, I won't be waiting for something extraordinary to happen. Simply sharing another conversation, another smile, and another peaceful silence would already be enough. Because after everything these past few days have taught me, I finally understand that the most beautiful stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin with two people who make each other feel at home. Night slowly embraced the neighborhood one final time. Moonlight rested gently across the notebook as your future soulmate closed it and placed it back on the windowsill where it had quietly witnessed every stage of this journey. Looking toward the endless stars, they smiled with calm certainty. They no longer wondered why they couldn't stop thinking about you after what happened that night. The answer had become beautifully clear. Some people enter our lives not to create chaos or uncertainty, but to remind us what genuine peace feels like. And once the heart experiences that kind of peace, it never truly forgets. Carrying nothing but gratitude, hope, honesty, and quiet confidence, they stepped into tomorrow believing that the most meaningful chapters of life are always written one ordinary moment, one sincere conversation, and one unforgettable evening at a time.